Ah, the beach. Volleyball, tank tops, scantily clothed and sizzlingly tanned bodies frolicking around. Boy, does it make for a great day. Lay out the picnic mat and the SPF 50 sunscreens. It's time to take a break from the city's hustle and bustle. That's the promise a beach holds. The sandy shore and the sea combined are the archetype of a relaxing rendezvous spot. And while beaches in India may not always live up to this fantastical imagery, let's be honest, our beaches can be tarnished with trash and toiletries like Juhu in Mumbai. Beaches in Australia do live up to this hype. Any Travel to Australia advertisement broadcast is displaying the Great Barrier Reef and pearl white beaches. But on 22nd October 2018, a body was found in one such Australian beach. The difference was, this wasn't a tanned person frolicking around. In fact, this body did not appear to move at all. This is the story of the day that redefined a sunny day at the beach for residents of Queensland, Australia. This is the story of Toyah Cordingley. Hi everyone, welcome to Desi Crime, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aryaan.
And I'm Aishwarya.
And the case that I have for you today is one that is riddled with randomness, things that happen that make no sense.
Aryaan, this name definitely rings a bell. I feel like I've heard it plastered all over social media, discussed on the gram. Was it at all trending this year?
It was trending this year for a very justified reason that I can't disclose just yet. But on our Instagram DMs at Desi Crime, for those of you who want to go check it out, the DMs were just filled with this one news article. But we will get to it in good time. It is the night of 21st October 2018. Toyah's mom, Vanessa Gardner, is getting ready to slide into bed and call it a night. At around 9 p.m., just as Vanessa wound up her bedtime routine, she hears a knock on her bedroom door. It is her son, Jack. Jack is Toyah's stepbrother. There was something urgent about this knock, something unsettling. Call it motherly senses or hindsight, Vanessa recalls feeling a shiver run down her spine, even though she had no idea what her son meant to relay to her. Just moments ago, Jack had gotten off the phone with a man named Marco Heidenreich. Marco was Toyah's boyfriend of 2 years, someone her family knew intimately. He wasn't a stranger, if anything, he was becoming a part of the family. But a call from him at 9 p.m., while unexpected, wasn't out of the ordinary. It was more so what he said to Jack that raised the alarm. Quote, "Toyah has been gone since the afternoon and is not traceable." End quote. Marco and Toyah live together in the city of Cairns. Cairns is in the far north Queensland region and happens to be the 14th most populated city in Australia. According to Marco, she left for the beach at around 2:30 p.m. that day and he hadn't heard from her since. Going to the beach alone was textbook Toyah, nothing out of the blue. Beaches in Australia are large and in Queensland in particular are gorgeous. In fact, Cairns, the city in which the 24-year-old Toyah was living and the city where she grew up, happens to be known as the Florida of Australia. It is a tropical environment, very different from the orange-hued, deserty Australian outback we often think of when we think of Australia. She would often take her dog Indy to beaches around the city for some well-deserved me time. Listen, if I was her and I had so many beaches in my proximity, I too would spend a ton of so-called me time at one of them. The one she had gone to on 21st October was the Wangeti beach, just a 38-kilometer drive from their residence. Wangeti too was a beautiful beach. For a second, let's transport ourselves into Toyah's shoes and visualize what it was like to be there. The state website describes this beach as, quote, a local secret, Wangeti Beach is just north of Palm Cove in tropical North Queensland. Running from Slipcliffe Point to Redcliffe Point, the 4 kilometers of almost straight coastline has no facilities, with only a car park on either end of the beach and a stretch of highway connecting them. You can build stone towers or try your hand at skipping the stones across the water, climb across and adventure through the pebble mounds, or simply check out the unique scenery. Think about that. That's what Toyah was doing, checking out the unique scenery. But by now, hours had gone by, and even though Wangeti was quaint and quiet and beautiful, it could get a little too quaint and a little too quiet sometimes. This worried Marco. Not only was Toyah still at a beach that was hidden in the nooks and crannies of Queensland, the sun had set by this point. The high tide was on its way. That is an unsafe time to be at any beach anyway when the waves get bigger and crash closer inland. To worsen his anxieties, Toyah wasn't responding to her phone. Patience grew into worry, and worry grew into fear. That's when Marco called Toyah's friends and family to ask about her whereabouts. He was met with the same disappointing response from all of them. We don't know where Toyah is. In a matter of minutes, this turned from a "let me check in on my girlfriend" call to the police being deployed for a full-fledged investigation. This is when Vanessa found out that her daughter was missing. Of course, despite being told that she isn't picking up her phone, Vanessa must have tried calling her daughter incessantly. I'm sure she hoped that maybe, just maybe, Toyah picked up her desperate mother's call. But those attempts would have been futile. The phone was unavailable. Despite the wrangling sensation of suffocation, Vanessa sprung into action. She reached out to her ex-husband, Toyah's biological father Troy, and asked him to help find their daughter as well. This was an all-hands-on-deck kind of situation. Brothers, uncles, aunts, everyone began reaching out to folks and sharing her pictures on social media. By 10:50 p.m. on 21st October, 8.5 hours since Toyah went missing, her family officially reported her as a missing person. Aishwarya, this is something I often think about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've all had that experience where one of our younger cousins or younger siblings has been missing for 15-20 minutes. The entire family, the entire society,
Goes crazy.
in your head at least, goes crazy trying to look for them. 15 minutes of, paralyzing anxiety later, you find them asleep in the bathroom. You know, these situations, these happen all the time.
Absolutely.
Those 15 minutes are probably the most crippling 15 minutes one experiences, because your head, you're catastrophizing to the worst possible outcome. Mm-hmm. But at what point would you, if such a situation arises when a relative is missing, it goes from, they could be somewhere, to we need to report them missing because we have tried everything and cannot. Is it 15 minutes, an hour, 2 hours? I just fail to understand how I would respond in a situation like this.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. There is a point where we cross over into the line of holy crap, this person isn't responding, something's wrong. And I think that point is in partly determined by where the person was supposed to be.
True.
And in part by the nature of the person themselves. There are certain people who don't like to pick up their phone. They just, when they go out to read, they're just out to read with their phone like switched off, and there's no getting through to them if you want.
Because I'm thinking, I hate when my mom bugs me.
Mm-hmm.
To call her or text her where I am.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is so unreasonable, such an invasion of my privacy. And I think for a second, if my son or daughter were out there, I would expect the same bloody thing. I need to know. So it's just that crippling anxiety that parents must experience.
No, and I think the important part is that the amount of time that has now passed in this case is definitely into that point. Regardless of where she was supposed to be, unless it was a flight that was supposed to be that long, I think now is the time to panic.
Despite the promptness of her family, nightfall at a desolate beach is not a suitable time to look for anyone. It is pitch black at Wangeti by midnight. One cannot tell where the sand ends and the sea begins. It's too dangerous and too ineffective to look for a single person at that hour. Both the family and investigators agreed to commence their search at the first crack of dawn. 21st October became the 22nd of October. As the night sky transformed into a darker blue with a sliver of sunlight gleaming through, 16 hours had passed by since Toyah was missing. Outside Wangeti Beach were Troy, Vanessa, the entirety of Queensland Police, all on one mission: to answer the question, where is Toyah Cordingley? But this brings us to a more primordial question we need to answer. Who is Toyah Cordingley? Toyah Jade Cordingley was born on June 14th, 1994 to loving parents Troy and Vanessa. As loving as they were as parents, as husband and wife, not so much. Early in Toyah's life, her parents divorced. Her father married a woman named Jade and her mother married Darren Gardner, with whom Vanessa would have 2 more kids, Jack and Leah. Funnily enough, whenever I start a case intro with the description of a broken family, you as the viewer are primed to wonder, oh no, another case of attachment issues and childhood trauma. Well, if you did think so, here's a healthy reminder that statistical averages in psychology cannot be used to analyze individuals, and certainly not Toyah, who was the diametric exception to the rule. While growing up in Cairns, Queensland, Toyah treated her parents' divorce as an excuse to enjoy the love of 2 separate happy families, the Cordingleys and the Gardners. Aishwarya, in all the cases I've covered for Desi Crime, Toyah Cordingley is one person with whom I relate more. She just oozes love and happiness and loves her independence. And I just love the kind of person she is, and just to get to know about her life.
And this is an amazing example. I mean, divorces are incredibly hard on children, but for a young adult to kind of see the positive, treat their parents as people in and of themselves.
2 families.
2 families with the right to be separate if they're not happy is incredible.
She was an amazingly positive and joyous woman, as is reiterated throughout this case and throughout the testimonies of the people who knew her.
That's awesome.
One of her first jobs was at an animal refuge centre called Paws and Claws. She was a kennel attendant, essentially taking care of rescue dogs. And her former employer, counsellor Michael Kerr, recalls her time fondly in an interview with Cairns Post and ABC. Quote, I knew her and her housemate when she was working for me. She was an absolutely loyal employee of Paws and Claws. She was one of those most beautiful souls. She adored animals. She was on a different level with animals than humans. She had something special with animals. Even the troubled dogs would calm down in her presence. An aggressive dog would come in, and within 20 minutes, she was rolling around on the floor and playing with it. When Toyah began dating Marco Heidenreich, the 2 bonded over their love for animals. Marco too had several dogs and was fond of snakes. Fond of snakes? What's up with white people and their crazy obsession with
weird.
Reptiles, snakes? I mean,
they'll just pick a fucking frog up, dude. It's just, I can't.
It's against
Go poke at a house lizard and pet it.
It's against every evolutionary survival instinct to pick
exists.
up these gross, disgusting, slimy
reptilian animals.
Yes.
Yeah. I agree.
He loved snakes. What sort of a resume character trait? Your Hinge profile says I love snakes.
My first ever roommate in Alma actually had, back in college, had multiple snakes as pets. So
in the room?
No, not in the room, but back at her house. He had affectionate names for them and everything.
Jesus. Regardless, they bonded over their mutual love for animals. And among the many pets they kept together, one of them was a massive German Shepherd, Great Dane and Mastiff mix with the unassuming name Indy. And Indy was the very same dog that accompanied Toyah on October 21st, 2018. Now, not only was Toyah missing, as a function of that, so was Indy. The dog's whereabouts perhaps could potentially lead the family and investigators to Toyah. After working at Paws and Claws, Toyah found a job at a pharmacy called Whole Life in Earlville. Earlville is a suburb in Cairns, so basically Toyah spent a majority of her life in and around where she was raised. But don't let that mislead you into believing that she was a small town girl. Toyah is best described by her relative Dave Trimble, who told the Brisbane Times, quote, Toyah was slightly different to the normal, everyday Cairns girl. The way she dressed, the colour of her hair, she was into fairies, she had fairy gardens at the house, she absolutely loved Paws and Claws, as in cats and dogs. She loved her car, loved the freedom it gave her to take her dogs out. The day she got her license was a big turning point in her life. It meant a lot to her. She would also dress beautifully for the beach, and she would always have a dog with her. End quote. Toyah might not have ventured out and seen other parts of the world, but her gung-ho attitude towards life was evident in her love for family and friends, but also apparent in her appearance. Her hair changed colors more frequently than a chameleon, from hot pink to purple to blindly blonde. Her look oscillated 24/7, 365 days a year. And that was Toyah for you, someone who yearned for freedom and went out and got it. My guess is she gets that from her mom. Vanessa is similar in that she too has a funky hairstyle and a bunch of tattoos, which might look out of place on a 40-year-old, but to me, this is just people living their best lives. This was evidently a happy family. Until October 22nd, 2018, when the search of Toyah Cordingley began. Almost immediately, a discovery was made. Toyah's 2009 Mitsubishi Lancer was found at the southern entrance of the beach. Her blue car served as an aspirin to the family. It brought momentary relief, assuring them that at least their daughter was still at the beach. Upon glancing inside the car, the pain resurged. After all, there was no trace of Toyah or Indy inside the car. The search continued. The sun began to aid in the search as it steered over the horizon. Everyone was checking every crevice possible to the naked human eye for any sign, any clue, any witness, any hope. And in doing so, Vanessa came across a bush. It caught her eye and she felt like there was something in it. Lo and behold, in the bush was a familiar face. Indy. How does a German Shepherd, Great Dane and Mastiff mix get tied up and doesn't howl until its throat is obliterated when these are some of the most daunting breeds? We're not talking about a Chihuahua or a Golden Retriever here. We are talking about a dog that scares the living crap out of you. One explanation is Toyah did that. But she's an ardent animal lover, has worked for a rescue, and this is her own dog. How can she torture Indy? So that theory is implausible. The other likely explanation that popped up in Vanessa's head was surely that the dog must have known the perpetrator. That's why it unflinchingly obeyed orders. But the dog's motives weren't a priority. As Vanessa said, if Indy was here, there's a good chance Toyah is probably somewhere near. So the search continued. In calling people all night and using the flashlight, Vanessa's phone had died. She headed back to the car to charge her phone, eager to resume her search. It was 7:45 a.m. by this point. The sun, now fully risen, did more than any investigator could do. Not only did it shine brightly onto the beach, it caused a low tide, reeling back all the water that had washed up onto the shore. As the water receded back into the ocean, like the velvet curtain at a theatre being drawn, it unveiled the horrific surprise it was hiding. While Vanessa recharged her phone, Troy continued searching. In the distance, he spotted something poking out at the wet sand. As he walked toward the thing for closer inspection, he realized it wasn't a thing poking out, but a foot, a human foot, Toyah's foot. 800 meters away from where her car was parked, Toyah Cordingley's body was found. Her body was buried in a sand dune. Troy didn't know what to do. Unearthing her body revealed horrific stab wounds, making her cause of death apparent to everyone. The heinous nature of the injury stamped an image in her father's mind that will never be washed away. He had to physically be dragged away from the scene by family and police. Troy later said, quote, "Toyah is my only child. Finding her body has burnt an indelible image in my mind. It is something a father should never have to suffer." End quote. Meanwhile, Vanessa was exempted from this torture since she was by the car. Her daughter's death was communicated by her son Jack. Till date, due to the nature of the stabbings, Vanessa wasn't allowed to see her own daughter's corpse. It doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure out what was on everyone's mind at that moment. Who killed Toyah? The investigation began almost immediately. A perimeter was set up. The Queensland Police, in conjunction with the State Emergency Services, used not only their personnel but volunteers from Cairns and other parts of Queensland in combing through the beach for clues. And when I say volunteers, I mean hundreds and hundreds of volunteers. This case had jolted far north Queensland and especially her native city of Cairns. They wanted answers. Who could have committed such a gruesome act against someone who had no enemies? The community demanded answers. After all, it had lost one of its pillars. Megan Armour, Toyah's best friend, beautifully sums up her lasting impact. Quote, I can't believe this. I refuse to believe this. I drove to find you. I thought we were going to find you, being the environment lover you are. I was so sure of it. I'm so angry. I'm so frustrated, and I've been walking around the house grieving and then thinking, it's not real. It's not my Toyah. It's someone else. I wanted to be like you. I wanted to be the gypsy soul you were. I wanted to be flawless, and not just the beauty you had on the outside, but the beauty that you had on the inside. You were different to everyone. You followed what you believed in, and you had nobody hating you. You lived life to the fullest, and you respected everyone else's decisions. You had such a big heart and beautiful, loving family you adored. End quote.
I don't know if we have any kind of medical reports or an autopsy conducted so far to rule out or confirm sexual assault, because it seems like such a random crime. Is this young, loving person at a beach with no enemies in a town she's grown up in, nothing seemingly stolen, not too much of a struggle on her body. Like, it's so random.
You know, it's sad, but isn't it almost better from the investigator's standpoint that maybe sexual assault was involved, because that would have at least given them a clue, a motive, right? Okay, this is the rapist on the prowl or something.
Yeah.
But there were no marks of any sexual assault.
Which is so much scarier.
Which is so much scarier, because then you're like, what just happened? You know, this peaceful town.
Yeah.
And, you know, sexual assault explains, all right, it's a man, and it's a certain kind of man. Look for a history of crime, look for a history of assault. This is just seemingly a mad, random act, which usually makes people think a serial killer might be involved. But at this point, the police has nothing to go off of. The community came together. Over 400 people crammed into a 300-seater chapel for only one thing: to celebrate Toyah's life, one that was characterized by love. As her uncle said succinctly, quote, "Today is not a day to be angry. Today is not a day to hate. Her life was cut short, but was full of love." End quote. But while the community and family grieved, the investigators had a task at hand. Emotion had to be kept aside. Facts had to be gathered. Divers were called in from Brisbane, and forensic dogs were called in to detect any scent, any trace of another soul lurking in that perimeter. CCTV footage of nearby highways was combed through. DNA was collected. Among a whole host of some pretty incredible work, even the police was left with two big questions. Firstly, studies suggest that 90 to 94% of all homicides are committed by people who know the victim, and a majority of the time the homicide is perpetrated by the man. And more often than not, it is sadly the partner. Naturally, all eyes went on Marco, her boyfriend. But that didn't make any sense. Firstly, because he was the one to be worried about Toyah's whereabouts, and secondly, friends and family knew that Toyah was very happy in this relationship. But then there's the father Troy, or her new stepfather. But despite the statistical probability that one of them might have done it, there simply was no motive for them to go to these extents. The second thing perplexing the police was the state of the dog Indy. Why didn't Indy attack? Or better yet, why didn't the perpetrator kill Indy? Why did they risk letting the dog live, who could easily have barked and compromised the murderer's location? The cops were puzzled, and no simple answer was available. In the meanwhile, though, a semi-breakthrough of sorts was made. The alibis of everyone in the family checked out. There was not a shred of evidence convicting anyone in Toyah's family or her boyfriend Marco. And while this answered one set of questions, it opened up another Pandora's box altogether. If this crime wasn't committed by someone they knew, who the hell would commit such a random crime? Despite the lack of evidence, the investigation had to continue. The public demanded answers. So given the cops didn't have a motive to work on, they cast their net extremely wide. This included DNA testing folks who lived near the scene of the crime on a voluntary basis to help rule out suspects. So instead of looking for a suspect, they opted for an alternative strategy, eliminating suspects and whittling that number down to one. This was obviously going to be a much more difficult task, cumbersome and inefficient, but the Queensland police kept at it. They first traced Toyah's steps that day. What did 21st October look like for her? Using CCTV and dashcam footage, police were able to verify that on the morning of that day, Toyah was working at the pharmacy on Bar Street, and there are photographs of her handing out camel milk-free samples to customers. Next, CCTV cameras also revealed that she went to Rusty's Market between noon and 1. She returned home after the grocery shopping, let Marco know about her beach excursion, took her blue Mitsubishi and mixed breed dog and headed out. And that's the last anyone ever saw her. So the cops established a timeline. Great, but that didn't lead them to anything concrete. They had to go back to the drawing board and continue chipping away at the cars that drove on the highway that day, people who lived close to the crime scenes, folks who were reported for sexual assault at beaches nearby in the past, and so much more. The cops were just rummaging through lists and lists and lists of people. But don't mistake this Herculean effort as shabby or clunky. It might not be a graceful investigation, but it sure as hell required a lot of work. The dog predicament was also answered when a close family friend shared with the police that Indy was very well trained and not raised to be an aggressive dog despite her genetic predisposition. The thing is, when you throw enough darts into the dark, one usually hits bullseye. The cops, after a long-winded effort, hit the bullseye. The Captain Cook Highway, which connects Smithfield and Port Douglas, was of particular interest to the police. They requested dashcam footage from drivers, dashcam being the pre-installed cameras that are in the cars, from drivers who drove the highway between noon and 7 p.m. on the day of the murder. They also asked folks who had driven to Wangeti Beach if they had seen something suspicious. In a press conference, Detective Inspector Sonia Smith told reporters, quote, "We are particularly interested in the time between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. on Sunday, October 21st. Any footage between Ellis Beach and the turn-off to Port Douglas, both north and south, we'd like to remind people to look around in their community and think about anyone in their community since last Sunday that has any injuries that can't be accounted for, movements that can't be accounted for between 12 p.m. and 7 p.m., and anyone with damaged or unaccounted for clothing." Then, in November 2018, just a month into the investigation, the police started asking the public for very specific kinds of information. For example, the police released a video of 70 cars that traveled the Cook Highway between 5:02 and 5:07, literally a 5-minute window. And the cops asked all 70 car drivers to identify themselves. It seemed like the police were on to a definitive timeline and were simply filling gaps, but that a suspect was in sight. And as you may have it, after hours and hours and hours of footage being discerned from one another, the suspects had been chiseled down, all the way to one suspect. 6 months after the crime, the police had a prime suspect. According to Police Commissioner Ian Stewart, the police were able to pinpoint 3 variables: dashcam footage, geolocation, and one car, just one car that was at the location of Toyah's phone. Furthermore, that same car, according to CCTV footage, can be found driving erratically on the highway. To worsen things, the car wasn't registered to the area and had no apparent reason for being near Wangeti Beach. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the person to whom the car was registered left Australia the very next day. Aishwarya, can you guess where this person went?
I'm going to take a wild guess and say India.
Good old India it was.
Before that, I just want to say kudos to the police.
Oh my God.
Because they're using what might be considered sort of rookie methods, and a lot of dry work and a lot of busy work and a lot of, like you said, shooting darts in the dark. But this is incredible work when they have not much to go off of. I'm really impressed.
Aishwarya, every time I read after 1 month, I'm like, that sounds like that should have taken a whole year. I'm so used to, South Asian crime and, how that works.
Yeah.
1 month to go through chunks and chunks. I mean, brilliant investigative work.
Yeah.
Meet Rajwinder Singh, a 34-year-old Indian origin man who had moved to Queensland several years ago from Punjab. He was a geriatric nurse at a hospital in Innisfail, a city that is 90 kilometers south of Cairns. Sources report that in the lead up to 21st October, Rajwinder was acting weird according to his co-workers. He had taken a long time off from work and was reportedly depressed. The only grounds on which the police sought to question him was the erratic driving and overlap of phone and car location. But when the cops showed up to his family's house in Innisfail, they only met his 2 children, one of whom was a newborn, and they met his wife. She told the cops that Rajwinder had fled home on, you guessed it, 21st October and not called back his own family ever since. the police knew they were on the right track. Further investigation revealed that Rajwinder flew from Queensland to Sydney on the 21st, stayed with his sister for a night, and booked the first flight out to Punjab on the 22nd of October. Witnesses report seeing scratch and bite marks on him as well, further corroborating the evidence. And with the correspondence of the Punjab police, Australian authorities verified that he was living in rural Punjab with his family. What sealed the deal, however, was the DNA found on the crime scene matched that of Rajwinder. The only problem, he's an Indian citizen in India for a crime against an Australian national in Australia. Now, no matter how guilty he may appear, international extradition is not the fastest process. If you've ever applied for a visa to Australia or America, remember how difficult and long that was to go there legally to do something fun. Now imagine instead of a visa, two governments had to exchange a murderer. It's a long, litigious, painstakingly slow process. So to Toyah's family, who knew their daughter's murderer was hiding in India, the slowness of the justice burnt. But Australian authorities wanted to be cautious. They wanted to have precise evidence and documentation to give to the Indian authorities to prevent any kind of legal melodrama. And that is exactly what they did. After all that wait, in 2021, after 2.5 years of the murder, the Australian Attorney General prepared a brief of extradition, the legal document which formally initiates an extradition, and sent it to his counterparts in India. Now the question was, how to find Rajwinder? Well, that was easier than you might have thought it would be. The answer was money. In October of 2022, Queensland announced a $1 million reward for anyone who finds Rajwinder or provides information about his whereabouts. $1 million is, a lot in Australia, but with the parity of currencies adjusted, it's even more valuable in India, worth around 5.6 crore rupees. And sure as hell, in less than a month of the bounty being announced, Indian authorities and Australian special agents in India were tipped off that Rajwinder was now part of a religious group. He was no longer clean-shaven and had lost a ton of weight. He had a scruffy beard and a turban. But most importantly, the insider leaked information that Rajwinder was heading to Delhi for a doctor's appointment. And that was that.
This sounds like someone who has a lot of inside, intimate information to know when someone's going for a doctor's appointment to Delhi. Mm-hmm. Who is this? Do we have any idea? Is this like a cousin?
So, A, these things are never revealed.
Okay.
And B, this is, I think, a cousin who saw an opportunity.
Right?
It was like...
That's a lot of money because it's kind of laughable in your own currency.
You get both karma points and money.
Absolutely.
It's like a win-win.
Win-win, absolutely. I see those posters in India of like 50,000 rupees if you return a...
Yeah. This is 50,000 rupees times 50,000. I don't know. That's a lot of money.
He had to be God. There's no way.
Just as he got off in Delhi on November 25th, 2022, authorities nabbed the internationally wanted fugitive and threw him behind the bars in Tihar. He has made a few short appearances to the court, and sources report that he actually confessed to the crime. Upon being asked why he killed her, his answer was, I don't know how to qualify his answer. I want to say his answer wasn't satisfying, but is there any answer for murdering an innocent 24-year-old that is ever satisfying? His reasoning was that he had a fight with his wife and had gone to the beach to cool down. He just so happened to carry a kitchen knife and some fruits when Indy started barking at him. This led to a heated argument between the unstable Singh and Toyah. Unable to control his emotion allegedly, he, in a frenzy, stabbed her with the very knife he had. That is his reasoning, and I'm not sure if I buy that.
That is his reason? He had a fight with his wife and just ended up on the beach in front of a woman with a barking dog. And I know no reason for murder is ever enough to justify murder. Absolutely no reason at all. Even someone else being a criminal sometimes doesn't justify the act of murdering them. But...
wouldn't it almost be better if he was a serial killer and you'd go, yeah, it's psychopathy.
That explains something, yeah.
I don't know what to make of this. I don't know. He was mentally I don't know, and the investigation is still ongoing in Australia, so perhaps we find the exact reason. But whatever we know as of now is just unsettling. The remaining steps were bureaucratic. Indian courts determined whether Singh would receive a fair trial in Australia. That's his right as an Indian citizen, and it is basic extradition protocol. And even if they do, Singh can always appeal to higher courts and delay the process. So with that said, justice in some form had been served, but we are yet to see its full effect. However, in January of this year, the Delhi court approved the extradition, and on 1st of February 2023, he flew from Delhi International Airport to Melbourne Airport. He's currently being prosecuted in Queensland. In the meanwhile, Vanessa still misses her sometimes blonde, sometimes pink-haired kid. At the age of 24, that's what Toyah was, a loving, freedom-seeking kid who lost it all for what? For being a woman and walking down a beach for some me time. That's the cost of freedom in the 21st century. So whether it is early morning jogs in your apartment or midday strolls on the beach or late night commutes from work, always remember, stay safe, stay crazy, and stay Desi.
If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.